Yeah. Well, we can go a bit longer because actually it's not
Okay.
so it's
Yeah.
not really.
Thanks, Julia. Kia ora koutou everyone. Ko Amanda Lee's aho. My presentation is a repeat of what was presented at SOTELNZ back in February. So it's been an interesting sort of reflective experience, revisiting sort of my slides and thinking, what did I talk about and how am I going to replicate that, given that sort of the good part of a year has gone by, and so we're sort of not really at this place anymore, but I'll try and sort of go back in time. So I'm an ethics lecturer within the health faculty here at AUT. I've been here for about 12 years, and I've always sort of incorporated sort of learning technology into my ethics education, which I've always enjoyed. Maybe a good or a bad point of that was that when our faculty came to sort of resurrect an old sort of dormant paper, they looked around in our sort of school and said, you're the tech, you can do this. So it's been a huge learning curve for me, but one that's been very enjoyable. Also giving recognition to my partners in crime. So I co-teach the particular paper that I'm going to be talking about with Laurent Antonchak. He's a lecturer in creative technology from AUT's CoLab. And also we work with learning technologist Tom Cochrane here at CFLAT. So it's really a transdisciplinary process, our practice, our research, our scholarship, which is slightly different sort of within the health faculty. We talk a lot, and a lot of our practice is around interprofessional practice, but the sort of transdisciplinary nature just sort of takes it one step further out and incorporating sort of ideas and thinking and theory from sort of cross-faculty, which I think is sort of an area of interest in the literature and also around future practice. That this is a reality of many of our students will be working in areas where the sort of transdisciplinary problem solving will be sort of required and sort of taking us out of the sort of areas where we have sort of more familiarity. So in the next sort of 15 minutes, I just want to cover 3 areas. I want to talk about just the context of this particular paper that we sort of did a bit of a redesign of. I want to talk about this sort of transdisciplinary process that we went through, and then this is about technology, so just looking at the benefits that were afforded to us through the use of technology. So the context, in the health faculty we have a health promotion program, and as part of that, up until around 2010, there was a paper called Media and Communications in Health Promotion. It's always been transdisciplinary, so someone from the School of Communications from the city would travel over the bridge and deliver this paper. And then I think the gentleman retired, and for some reason it was considered sort of not really very relevant for what was needed around 2010, and so it was sort of put on the shelf. And so 2 years ago, we sort of had a bit of a restructure, rethink about the direction of our program, and it was just decided that this paper would sort of come back to life. So Laurent and myself started to look at the paper as it was in 2010 and realised that within that 7-year period, a lot had changed around media and around communications. The way that we communicated, the tools that we have available for communication, who sort of owns and controls and can contribute to media. So we were thinking about the different changes that we would have to make in terms of content, but also that led to sort of changes in the sort of choice of pedagogy. So back in 2010, it was quite a didactic delivery. Students were taken through 12 weeks of learning how to create a website. So now our students take about 12 minutes to create a Wix or a WordPress page. So we decided to sort of make some big changes, and we sort of went more towards sort of a student-generated content. So we have very little content. Students sort of create their own sort of pathways of learning. we think about more about the process of learning rather than the product. So they undertake a blog, so they're week by week they're reflecting on their learning. They're learning around media, around digital tools, around their experience of learning about these tools, rather than the product. So they hand in their blog, they hand in an artefact, so they have a digital project where they choose one particular focus around health, and then they match that to a particular form of digital tool or social media that would be best to promote that to a particular target audience. But the actual artefact is not really graded. It's that process of they've gone through, the critical thinking that's taken place in order for them to get to that sort of final product. So we use Google Community. We'll have to make some changes given that that's not going to be around for much longer. And the students, we introduce them to things like Twitter, KineMaster, WordPress, SurveyMonkey, a whole lot of different tools, but they go away and find their own tools as well. So we had lots of students creating cartoons, and we had never taught them any sort of cartoon apps. They had gone away and found those for themselves. So the sort of things that they were looking at were things like cartoons, radio adverts, videos, bus shelter, posters, etc. So quite a shift. We went. How did we do this? We really used student feedback. We used a community of practice between the three practitioners, and sort of these iterative sort of cycles of change. So I guess one of the sort of challenges was around challenging students to think differently and to learn differently. So many of our students, our paper has no prerequisites. It's pitched as a level 7, so a third year paper, but any student can take it. So we have lots of variation in sort of maturity and attitude and ability. But lots of them, even right up to the last year students, they want a template, they want a checklist, and they continually asked for this, which we found quite interesting and a little bit frustrating. But frustrating for them too, interesting that they felt that we had given them too much creativity. So we wanted to shift away from that sort of checklist to sort of create graduates that were more sort of agile, and that we were hoping to create a sort of a safe environment for them to be challenged. They're very assessment sort of focused as well, so we can't get away from assessment, but we wanted to sort of shift that to sort of thinking more about their learning process. We did go through these sort of cycles of change, trying to be very reactive to the needs of the student. So we sort of had weekly revisions of what we were doing and how we were implementing this. And we had this community of practice. So this was the transdisciplinary aspect, so learning technology, creative technology, and health. I guess not only did we come from different faculties but different backgrounds, and even down to sort of the faculty processes, even though we were in the same university, even the way that we do things compared sort of from CoLab to the health faculty in terms of reporting, in terms of paper booklets, right down to sort of that sort of level of detail was very different. One of the ways that we created this community is that we had a blog. So while we had the students keeping a blog of their sort of weekly reflections on what they had been learning and how they were reacting to that learning experience, so did we. So Laurent and I kept a weekly blog reflecting on what had been happening each week in the teaching space, and also what was happening for us as a teacher, as a co-teacher, and how we were sort of seeing our sort of teaching relationship develop. We also had a face-to-face meeting every week with Tom, so the three of us would meet and again sort of think about the paper, think about our teaching, but also we sort of utilised Tom as a mentor, and quite often he would use us as a guinea pig, and we would often try out new things. So there was a lot of mirroring of sort of student-learner roles. So we we would try out a new tool that Tom had come across. So we would go out and test it. Often, it would be recorded, and then we would reflect on it and put it on to the Google community so that our students could see us learning something new. Not necessarily getting it right first time, and then us reflecting on, what was that like, what would we have to do differently. So trying to sort of model what we were, hoping that the students would do as well. So there was really a sense of, trying to sort of facilitate a sort of a learning environment that was a little bit different to what the students had been used to. So technology was really at the forefront of sort of enabling this sort of different style of teaching to take place. So I just want to cover sort of 3 areas of how this happened. We talk a lot about sort of creating independent thinkers, independent learners, but what became apparent is that there's sort of a step before that. There's sort of an unlearning has to take place to sort of feel free to not be wedded to the template and the checklist, which actually takes a lot of sort of risk taking and sort of that sort of sense of vulnerability. So I sort of think about it in terms of first having an undependent pedagogy where we've got to try and help and facilitate people to be less dependent on what they have become familiar with. Because in the changing environment in tomorrow's workplace, many of the things that we're familiar with won't exist. So rather than, so I think it's really important for students and practitioners to be able to reflect on, how we learn and the experience of that, rather than learning the nuts and bolts of particular tools or particular ways of doing things. Because, in 5 years and 10 years, many of the things that we have and use won't exist. So we're experiencing this ourselves with things like Google Community, hearing that that's not going to be around. So having to rethink, what sort of platforms can I have for my students? I was really fond of another app, BAM user, a live broadcaster. That's no longer. So we don't see a lot of point in teaching our students the nuts and bolts of particular tools because those tools are unlikely to exist. But it's around teaching students to reflect on how they learn and their experiences of learning so that then they feel confident and feel equipped to actually tackle new areas of learning. And that's challenging. We really want to help students to feel more comfortable with feeling uncomfortable because that's sort of when the learning takes place. And technology has enabled that to happen because I think through some of the tools that we're using has sort of brought in a level of transparency. So we get to see how other people think and act a lot more than we would with traditional teaching tools. I think technology has enabled us to focus more on the process than on the product. And also the technology has shifted or has helped sort of facilitate the shifting of the role of the teacher. Rather than being like this, standing in the front, technology has us all sort of sitting around a sort of a virtual table, so to speak. So we can all be learners and we can all be teachers as well. So there's a real sense of learning from doing, again, focusing on this process. And so this is just sort of an end of semester comment from a student that they have to present ideas in week 3, week 7, week 11, same material but built on obtaining feedback from their peers, from us, and they get it, and then they get it at the end. That this is about building confidence, about cycles of feedback, so that you actually get something decent. So this student sort of reflecting on, gosh, if we could do this somewhere, in other papers, we could actually sort of be doing some pretty good things. So this particular student really sort of epitomised what we were hoping for. At the time, very frustrating that all she was trying to do was post her blog in the Google community, and it took her seven attempts, and she told us how many hours of work that was. But this is the learning. This is where she learned. about how to post, about how not to, about herself, how does she learn, what mechanisms will help her next time to overcome a challenge like this. So, again, learning from doing. We didn't give them instructions, they learnt, they figured out how to do these things themselves. Learning from discovery, learning from their experiences of not quite getting things right. So in this one, when she shared for the first time, she did manage to get it onto Google+, but she put it in the public sphere. So that might be something that we might want to avoid. So we might want sort of mechanisms in our teaching to prevent, public disclosure because of the risk. But actually, yes, there might be risk, but also there's benefit, there's opportunity, because this is where she learned about how to post to a private space. And there was no real risk involved. She wasn't posting any sort of explicit material. It was just a first blog. It was just a few lines of her first experience in the class. The other interesting thing is that this is in her public blog. She's blogging for herself, but she's also blogging for her peers when she says, this made my video available to you all. So she's writing it for her peers to learn from. But also she's learned critical thinking and the art of critique, because in her delving into the sort of public world, she's met this beefy chief, and she's managed to critique him, to saying, well, look at all the stuff I've learned about you, and I think you're probably sharing a bit too much. So in that sort of mistake that we could have avoided had we given really clear instructions, I don't think she would have learned as much as she did through this sort of opportunity to just learn through discovery. So there was learning for us as well as academics. It's challenging to sort of throw out what's familiar and sort of go with the flow, try different things. I think perhaps at our level, at undergrad, there's a sense of students liking familiarity, so they quite like to come into a paper, they've got Blackboard, they'll get the PowerPoints, they'll know that there's an assessment in week 6 and 12, and I can sort of get on back to my normal life. So we didn't use Blackboard, we didn't have any PowerPoints. So there was a sense of having to learn a lot of new skills. Quite isolating at times, I think, sort of as an early adopter of a sort of a new sort of style, or new within our school. Quite isolating. You sort of got staff that are sort of looking on, sort of hoping that you'll succeed, so that then they can sort of do what you've done, and perhaps a smaller group that are sort of looking at you thinking, well, I'm sort of waiting for you to fail, and then I'll sort of just say, well, at least I'm still doing what I was doing. So, yeah, it's sort of an interesting position as a sort of an academic. But I guess overall that technology really enabled and enhanced this ability, and this is sort of a great little final quote from a student who sort of coined this phrase, sort of a horizontal, I don't know if other people have used it, but a horizontal learning approach, that we were actually learning together. There was sort of, we were there to facilitate their learning, but everybody was teaching everybody else sort of something new. So I guess transdisciplinary practice enables us to sort of take risks, to be vulnerable, to learn new ways of thinking and doing, tries to meet some of the challenges of the sort of problem-solving skills that will be required in 21st century sort of practice. And that at times it feels scary. Most of the time it's exciting, but I think overall it feels that it's sort of necessary. Thank you.